Good morning, everyone. We're going to give everybody a couple minutes to trickle in. So if you need to grab tea or something like that, go ahead and do that. We'll give it a couple minutes. We might have a small group today. We'll see. Hey, Julia. Um, are you able to pull up slides and the checklist if we need it and share it? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I went to log in to the agenda that I sent out this morning from an outside computer and realized that maybe the links, I might have not attached the links correctly. And so we may need to show that. Were people able to open up the links in the agenda and see those items? You were. Okay, great. Maybe it's just something weird about my computer.
Let's say, Sarah, that for the slides it said I did not have access. I'm not sure if that's what you were referring to.
Yeah, so the links in the agenda didn't work.
Yeah.
Okay, my apologies for that. I'm on a learning curve still with this state system. So, but we can look at those things today. Um, and Julia, I'm sorry to get you. Can you, I can also do it, but you might just be able to navigate it more quickly. Lulu is texting me that seems like she doesn't have the current link, which do you mind emailing her, Lulu, the link quickly?
Yeah, let me
Okay.
just forward that to her.
Yeah, you're just speedier than I am with the computer. Great. So I know Lulu is trying to get here, so we'll wait another minute or so for her so that she can get in. And then we'll start.
And I did just want to say, actually, I thought I could get in. I thought I had gotten in, but I didn't get in all the way to what you sent as far as those links. So,
Yeah, thank you. That's my mistake, and I will I'll test the links um externally next time before I send the agenda. All right, well, we'll get going. If everybody can put their name and the organization they're with or their capacity that they serve on the council again, in the chat, I think we're all getting to know each other, but it's nice to have that as an index, to be able to refer back to. So if everybody could do that quickly. All right. Oh, there's Lulu. Great. She made it. Hi, Lulu. You made it.
All right. Sorry, technical difficulties.
No, it's great. So yeah, if everyone can just put their name and the capacity that they serve on the council in the chat, um, that will be great. And Julia, if you wouldn't mind hitting the record button, and we'll get started. So welcome everybody. It's great to see all of your faces this morning. I'm feeling a little sleepy. I don't know if anybody else is feeling a little sleepy this morning. It gets the weather, but I don't believe that we have any updates from Office of MaineCare directly. Julia, do you have anything?
No, nothing to share. Thank you, though.
Yeah, sure. Um, so after the last meeting, and I think I put this in the email, we kind of decided that it might be a good idea to create a checklist to keep track of the draft recommendations as we go and look at things that are upcoming. I put a link to that in the April agenda. But I have realized that I think that the links for those did not work for people. So, Julia, if you wouldn't mind sharing the checklist, we can have a look at it together. And again, my intention was for everybody to have eyes on this before this meeting. So I apologize that that didn't work out and that you all are seeing this for the first time. So this is a checklist that everybody will have access to. We'll make sure that it actually gets attached to an email instead of linked into the agenda after this meeting. So this is a way we thought we could kind of keep track of the draft recommendations that we have sort of come to consensus on, and they're dated there. So you can see last time we had a recommendations for CPR certification, HIPAA training, high school diploma or GED requirements, and the core competency model, and then that first recommendation on what to include in core competencies. And then there's a list at the bottom that are things that are still to be decided. And so the intention is for this to be a living document. This is not by any means a complete list of what's still to be decided, nor, it's meant to change over time. And so this is just to kind of keep us all on the same page in terms of the decisions that we have come to as a group. And to give everybody a heads up in terms of what's coming up in the future. So does that seem like a good way for us all to collectively keep track of decisions that we're making? Yeah, great. Good. And if anybody has suggestions, always open. We're all, I think we're all kind of learning about this process as we go. So if people have suggestions or things that would be helpful in making this process more clear, please don't hesitate to always, reach out to us and let us know about that. But that's a document that will be available to everybody, and we'll just keep it updated as we go. So last time are there questions about the checklist before I move on to the next agenda item? No. Okay. So last time there was a discussion about potentially requiring background checks. And there was in the email we sent with the April agenda, there was information there from Ben Hummel, who Julia reached out to about the background check requirements for CHWs. So there's a synopsis of that information in the email, the email that I sent, but just to review, community health workers are usually employees. And so background checks are handled by their employers and are dependent on that employer's HR policies. So for the new Maine Community Health Worker certification, the background check was intentionally not required, and that certification is being held by MECHWI, and I don't remember it must be the Maine Community Health Worker Initiative. I think I remember what the acronym is, but that certification is held not by the state, but by this third-party group. And they intentionally decided not to require background checks. And those decisions about background checks for community health workers are deferred to the person or group that's going to be employing that CHW. So community health worker certification in general is handled outside of Maine DHHS, and the state doesn't have oversight of certification. Community health workers, unlike doulas, do not bill MaineCare directly for services, and they don't need to enroll as MaineCare providers. And so this is a bit of a different professional. It's different from what we're doing as doulas, certainly in terms of what the structure of the profession looks like. Employers of the CHWs can be reimbursed for CHW work under MaineCare if that community health worker is working as a team member as part of a bundled service model. And he also just noted that the certification process and the payment models for CHWs are really new in Maine, and that considerations around state mandated background checks may not be completely settled yet and could change in the future because this is all also new, similarly to doulas. So yeah, some things to take into consideration there in terms of what community health workers are doing and not doing, and also the way that those two, the way that doulas and CHWs are professionally different. I don't know if any of our policy people want to weigh in on things that I might have missed or that I might have gotten, jumbled a little bit. Does that sound accurate to your understanding?
I don't have anything to add.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So questions about this, I think in terms of what other states are doing in terms of doula services, 10 of the states that are currently reimbursing, which is about 40%, have some level of requirement for background checks or fingerprinting. And I know we have a slide that Margaret made that breaks that down if we want to look at that. Do people have questions or have had, I know that there was like a lot of discussion about this last time, and I don't know if people have had further thinking about this. People have anything to add? No. Do people have feelings about what kind of a recommendation they want to make on this? Are we collectively leaning toward this is something that we would like to require or something that we don't want to require? No thoughts? Hey, Shannon.
Hi, I'm wondering who it excludes and who it brings in. And so I kind of sit on the fence about it because of course background checks they're there for a reason, but who are we leaving out if we I guess what is it in service to and at what cost? Always. Those are the two questions. Who's going to be left behind if they do have a record of some kind, and what record are we looking for, right? Is this a felony stuff or what are we looking for?
Lulu?
I think I recall from the last time we discussed this that there can be levels of information you can check because I feel like just like a carte blanche background checked, it sounded like that didn't feel like a great option. But that somebody had mentioned that it's potentially that you can create kind of a checks background check system where there's just certain pieces of information that are checked, but not everything blown open for individuals. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I also remember a conversation about that. Kate, do you?
Yeah. My understanding is it's possible to do a background check that is more limited. I think the issue that we're bumping into is that MaineCare wouldn't be doing the checks. People would have to do them themselves. And so, there'd be different companies that you go to. And I haven't looked into what the sort of going rates are, the exact levels. We could certainly do that. I guess the two things I come back to is if 40% of the states are requiring it, that means 60% are not. So the majority of states are not requiring background checks. And what Juanita was saying last time, I'm pretty sure it was Juanita, that even if we're talking about like sex crimes, for example, that the sex offender registry is very incomplete, and lots of people also get hired even though they are technically on that. And so it's a really incomplete and maybe not, it's not a foolproof tool for sussing out who may be an unsafe person. And as we all know, most people who assault folks are not on any registry at all. So I guess like I keep, as I break it down more and more, I'm kind of like, what would we gain from doing this? And I just don't see a ton of gain in it, I guess.
Does it also put folks who are undocumented at risk? And I think about any of the cultural doulas that we have worked with in the past through our cultural doula program. Like, are there folks who are not going to do this work because that opens the door to, you know, access to them and their families through all those other terrible ways that we access people?
Yeah, and I'm thinking for me, like Shannon said, most of the community that I am in, everybody was, especially if they came through the border, was put in detention and they had like a bracelet. And so every time they try to get to do, every time background check is done for even other things, that one always show up. And it's keep them from, it has kept many already from accessing many things. So I'm curious whether this is going to be another one that's they will not try to do it because they already know that the background check is going to come as if they are criminals.
Yeah, thank you, Nuna. That's really important information, I think, for this group to have. Do we have more discussion or thoughts on this? Do we want to make a recommendation on this? Do we need more information?
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
You said that MaineCare itself wouldn't be doing the background checks. So, like, are we thinking that we have to have this like complete like checklist of things that you have to kind of submit and say the background check would be part of that in order to get the I guess it's not a license or whatever certificate, whatever.
Yeah, so this would be like one thing on a checklist that a doula would need to do, and that requires, you know, going to an outside place, getting the background check done. I think there's a fee involved with it, and then making sure that that is submitted along with your application.
Okay. And if employers already do that, would that be something that the employer could just forward to it? Or is it something that we are going to make be like up to date? Like when you apply, like it has to be a fresh one?
Yeah, that's a really good question that I don't I hadn't thought about that. If someone is employed elsewhere and they've already had a background check done somewhere, if that would suffice, or if, you know, somebody would need to go and get another one. I don't know. That's a really good question.
Okay.
And something we can find out an answer to. Lulu?
Is the information that in theory we would be getting from a background check something that could be satisfied by like the letter of recommendation? You know, we're just trying to make sure that the character of the doula, that they're reliable, that they haven't made bad choices, unsafe choices in their line of work. And I feel like if there was a requirement or the option for letter of recommendation, that could be reasonably addressed through that course, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Lulu, and that's, you know, certainly an agenda item. There are a number of other states that require a certain number of letters of reference to be sent with the application. So I think something that Kate and I are cognizant of is, you know, it will be somebody at Office of MaineCare who will be charged with looking at those letters and reading them and assessing that person. So we certainly don't want to like place undue burden on on our state staff for, you know, reading loads of like letters of recommendation with application. But I personally feel like that's a good way to just provide a little bit more like outside context on somebody. Certainly not going to, it's not going to tell everything about somebody, but I think that's a valid way of thinking about this. Kate?
Yeah, I mean, so we talked a bit last time about this idea of like, we don't want to make recommendations that would then, if MaineCare cannot provide like the necessary administrative capacity for checking all these things, then they might not accept that recommendation. Like we talked about that a bit, and I guess I just want to like lift up that in talking to other leadership within MaineCare, my understanding from the email from Loretta was like we should not, that's outside the scope of the council to decide that or to think about that. And so that, that note, I don't know, that makes me think that a letter of, character reference or something, which Courtney had mentioned in the first meeting, would, if that's what we're hoping for, that would make more sense than a background check. Or yeah, so I just want to lift that up. Like I'm of two minds about it. Like I don't want to make recommendations we think are unlikely to be satisfied by MaineCare's administrative capacity. And also if we're being told that's outside of what we should consider, I'm kind of like, okay, well, what makes the most sense here? I'm cognizant that people are going into folks' homes. And so in that way, like a letter of like character reference to me makes a lot of sense. And instead of doing nothing, but a background check just feels like it's just not guaranteed to give us the accurate information either.
I'm curious. Oh, I'm sorry. I did not raise my hand.
Rebecca?
So when we get to the point where people are sending in, like, I guess it would be like kind of an application to be part of the doulas that would be reimbursed, is that going to be limited spots? Is it per year? Is it going to be like an open policy, like you at any time you can, or will there be like enrollment periods?
That's a great question. I think my assumption had been, enrollment is, there's not a specific number of spots to be filled and enrollment is ongoing, but that is a question that we should definitely ask, because I think I have an assumption about how that works, and Margaret or Julie might be able to answer for us. Julie, do you have an answer to that, or Margaret? I know you're on the policy end of things and not necessarily the enrollment end.
You can go, Julie.
Okay. Yeah, happy to chime in. So it kind of depends on the service sometimes if there's caps, but for the most part, we try to just anticipate from budgetary standpoints what the utilization will be. So at this point, we are like it will be just rolling enrollment. There will be caps likely, or there will be some kind of scope for the actual delivery of services per member. And then I think as we roll things out too, like we'll probably get a good understanding of what volume each doula will be delivering. So as far as the enrollment pieces go and utilization, like it will be, we'll try to get like some kind of idea, but from a provider lens, it'll be open-ended.
And we have a pretty small workforce. We're not talking about, we have less than 100 doulas probably working in the state. And then a fraction of those people, I would imagine. I mean, we don't know, but it's not like, we're not thousands of people that are going to be overwhelming the system. So,
Well, and sometimes like we just have to take those pieces into account. So if all of a sudden we have 3,000 individuals seeking to attend all, what is it, like 11,000 births every year, like, if the numbers are really inflated in a wonderful way unexpectedly, then there might be like temporary measures that are put in place to ensure that the funding is allocated for these services. But that is hopefully a wonderful problem that we can tackle down the road. But yeah, for the most part, I don't think we need to, we can actually talk about more, but I don't think we need to give too much space to that concern. well, I have the spotlight, if I could just throw
Yeah,
out
yeah,
there,
yeah.
just
Please.
as we are discussing with the background checks and letters of recommendation and such, I'm wondering, Margaret, if it would be helpful for us to kind of go back and see just from an operational standpoint, just the administrative burden that those options might entail and what's actually feasible on our end. So if something can't be operationalized realistically, I don't really want it on the table. If if we're trying to decide between things, I think it'd be helpful for us to understand if these are actually realistic options on our end. I don't know, Julie and Margaret, if you agree, but I think that might be helpful for us to take back potentially before making an official recommendation as a council. I'm just really understanding what we have to work with. Does that make sense?
That makes sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, I
Other
know
folks'
that
thoughts?
I know that we have been told that it's outside of our scope to think about other people, but that's just not how we are, I think, as a group. That's not the that's not the culture of the people that are at this meeting. I think we're all people who want to take into consideration the burden on others. That's just the nature of birth work in general. So I think that would be a great idea to go back and just find out what's reasonable.
But we'll
Yeah.
try to take for people out of the mental equation then and just look at the systems. You just why spend want to make sure that what we're discussing is realistic and feasible.
Yeah. Great. Lulu?
Yeah, and considering how burdensome that workload could be in terms of processing recommendation letters, what if there was like some hybrid or some reduced version of that where we have like, not that we want to reduce the character of anybody to a checklist, but like what if there were like points and applicants could just have, three people, for instance, affirm like, okay, yes, this client, this, they meet these criteria, and then they sign from their individual perspective. And so it's not like you're reading CVs, three different CVs of varying lengths. It's like, yes, three people have attested to these, maybe safety related or character related aspects of this person that would qualify them.
It's like an attestation
Yeah,
letter.
where it's like, rather than trying to find the information we need in like probably a wonderful but longer recommendation, we have the kind of meat of what we're looking for that folks can be like, yes, this person does meet this criterion, like, and whatever we find we would need to note or to find them applicable, that would be listed on an official form. And so if somebody had the required number of these official attestations, that would be pretty easy to process, whether it's 100 doulas or I don't know what pretty easy, but it would be easier, I assume, than long-winded recommendations on that scale.
Yeah. So Julia, Margaret, is that something that you can take back also to find out if, there was some kind of an attestation form, if that would feel like more feasible in the system to do a form like that somebody would attest to versus a character reference? Is that something you can ask about?
We can take that back.
Okay.
Well, no, I appreciate so when we're looking at these firmer processes, the subjective and objective nature of this documentation through review processes, I think it's a good thing to keep in mind.
Leanna, can you speak up? I'm sorry, I can hardly hear you.
I'm so sorry. I'm having some speaker and microphone issues. I was just saying, like some of this documentation, like the subjective and objective nature of these pieces of just having yes and no boxes with signatures is different than hearing someone's story and explanation for things, and feelings aren't the same as boxes when it comes to systems. So taking that into consideration for some of these processes, we just want to set everybody up for success.
Okay. Tiffany?
I second that. As I've been sitting here and listening in, I've been curious about, well, one, whether or not MaineCare is the right entity to review that, and therefore coming back to whether or not we would make recommendations here, not that there may not be value in having a background check and or letters of recommendation or attestations for character. But as I've been sitting here thinking about these letters of references and what that review process might entail, I'm also really concerned about implicit bias as part of the review process. And it seems like it would benefit from having some manner of rubric that minimizes the likelihood that there's implicit bias, which could vary from reviewer to reviewer. So having something that's more standardized, something that's more objective, while that probably, I think who was it that was asking the question, maybe Shannon, of just, who is this really designed to support or kind of let in, who doesn't. Dr. Lawrence Alexander asked the question of like, who do we privilege, who do we marginalize, and who do we miss? So I'm sure there are going to be people that are missed in that process. And I just would love to see a process, if there is one, that minimizes the risk of further harm, discrimination, bias.
Yeah, agreed. We need to move on a little bit so we can get to the real meat of the work today. But Rebecca, okay.
Sorry, I always have lots of questions.
Yeah, it's great.
So in the, I guess you would call it kind of the application process, my question is, how like open are we going to be to those who don't have much experience, like myself? Like, because we always want to be including the next generation of people who are going to be practicing doula work. So we also need to keep that in mind too. It can't just be about experience, because that's zero for some people, So we need to keep that option open. I don't know, it wouldn't be an option really. It would just be that mindset that we need to be supporting, growing doulas.
Yeah, agreed, especially where I hope we have a lot of new doulas coming into the state. And I think that experience, those training pathways are, I think we can definitely talk about that and what might or might not be required. We can look at what other states have done, but I think
We did our training last fall, and we did it to serve all of the tribal communities. There were a few of us from each one, but coming back home and talking about it, and as things are shared on social media, there is an enormous amount of interest, which is awesome. So I want to make sure that we leave room for that.
Yeah, 100%. I agree.
Could I ask a quick educational question for my own purposes? With the education. All right, can folks hear me? I am so sorry. We're working on getting a new computer. Just education piece for myself. With both the experience pathway and certification, is there a apprenticeship period, or is there a set period or a number of births attended, or is there any kind of benchmark? There's nothing. So okay.
Yeah, so oftentimes all the training programs are different. They all require different things. Some of them require attendance at births. Some of them don't. And so I think that's like the sort of like Wild West that we're going to have to like kind of wander into about what that looks like. And then remembering that if we're requiring births, we're excluding doulas that are only going to do postpartum work. I mean, I think there's a big conversation around all of that need to happen. But it's a really great question.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. I'm just don't want to reinvent the wheel, but I couldn't remember if something had been established. So theoretically, I could just watch some YouTube videos and say, "Hey world, I'm a doula, pay me." And even though technically I am very unqualified, there is nothing prohibiting me from making that claim.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Rebecca, did you have anything else to add, or is your hand still up? Okay.
No, I'm good.
Great. So I think what we will do in terms of background checks is we will table it again, and Julie and Margaret will get some more information for us, and we'll just continue to have this discussion until we feel like we're ready to make a recommendation on it. So I wanted to move along to the sort of big work of this meeting, which is to establish recommendations on the remainder of the core competencies. And so what we thought might be really useful is we're going to do an in-meeting poll, and we've kind of taken all of the core competencies from other states, and that we've seen those repeated on the slide. I think there are 16 of them. This council made a recommendation on the cultural competency piece at the last meeting, so I don't think we'll see that in the poll, but the remaining 15, and people can. We can kind of do a vote on what people would like to see included. And we thought that would be the best way that would give us an indication on things that we immediately have some consensus on that we might want to include versus things that we might be divided on that need more discussion. And we thought that might be the most time efficient way to go through. So one thing again, and I just brought it up that I want to highlight, and Kate, I don't, you may have things to add, but Kate and I are both aware that we have doulas in the state who are working now exclusively as postpartum doulas, who may not have had training in things that are specific to labor and birth. They may have taken, just a postpartum doula training. And so for now and for going forward to make sure that we're being mindful that we are not going to lose those postpartum doulas to enrollment in MaineCare by requiring a lot of training that's related to labor and birth and how we might think of that. So in the workforce assessment that that Maine Doula Coalition did, postpartum work is the most common doula service offered in Maine. So there are more doulas offering postpartum work than labor work, and that just means that most doulas are offering labor and birth and postpartum, but there is this group of doulas, and I think it was around 15 or 20%. That are just doing work postpartum. And so to keep those folks in mind and make sure, I think the concern that I have is that we're gonna make recommendations, and the enrollment will be such that some of those doulas who have only been doing postpartum work and are only trained in postpartum work are going to be excluded from enrolling, or may need to go back and get a substantial amount of training in order to enroll in MaineCare. Kate?
I think this might be a question for Juliana and Margaret, and maybe Julia, is it possible that we have a just modestly different set of eligibility criteria for people who are just postpartum doulas? I'm imagining if someone is applying to MaineCare, they could maybe check, I'm planning to offer birth and labor services, postpartum services, both, or just one of those. And then that would then in a flow chart, right, lead to okay, if you're just doing postpartum, then these are the core competencies that are required. And it's just very slightly different from maybe the folks who are doing labor and birth. Right. And I see Rebecca saying folks who are serving abortion, folks seeking abortion. Yeah. So, I think that there are a bunch of us who would call ourselves full spectrum, right? So I work with folks on loss and abortion and birth and postpartum, right? But some people are just going to offer one of those things, right? And I think the way the way abortion is being sort of addressed in some of the language that is being written into Medicaid is the language is supporting folks with all pregnancy outcomes, which is a way of not saying the word abortion, because we know how the feds feel about that, but being inclusive of those services. So I guess I'm just wondering if it complicates it too much, or if it's just possible to say, okay, someone can apply to just provide postpartum covered services. And someone can apply to be a full spectrum doula. I don't know if that's possible, but that's one of my questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is a great discussion for when we kind of get into that training piece. And I don't want to go too far down into this right now, just because I think what we're talking about doing, we're creating a specific designation for postpartum doulas is something that no other state has done that yet. So this would be a new, um, kind of brand new thing that Maine would be doing. So I bring up the postpartum piece just because as we're about to look at these core competencies, I just want people to keep that in mind as we're, you're kind of ticking boxes on the core competencies to keep that piece in mind. And then there's also down the road, as we're talking about the different training pathways, there's ways that we can handle this postpartum doula discussion around, allowing existing postpartum doulas to come in as legacy doulas versus requiring a lot of new education. And again, I think that's something that we can talk about as we move forward. But I just wanted to highlight that as we're in the context of looking at these core competencies, and we can just certainly have like a lot of robust discussion around postpartum doula versus birth doula certification down the road. Anne Marie?
I'm sorry. I meant to lower it. I'm just typing something in the chat. I was just thinking about, so abortion. There may be some people who consider themselves full spectrum who would not want to be offering abortion services. So again, because if you're going to say what's going to be in the education stuff, I mean, if we're going to require people to have the education around that, that might also be a disincentive for some people. But that's again, like you said before. That's the bigger education scope. So I don't think we need to go down there. Sorry.
No, it's great. Thank you, Anne Marie. Julia, would you mind? Are we ready to we're having some trouble with Menti this morning. But Julia said that she's logged in and it's working now.
Yes.
So I would love to do this poll. Oh, Tiffany?
I apologize if this is not super helpful at this juncture, but I can't help but feel like this process would be so much simpler if there was an outside entity or outside organization who was willing to do the verification process, looking at letters of recommendation, looking at background checks, looking at distinction in terms of core competencies, as well as maybe additional distinction for postpartum doulas, et cetera, that just issues either a letter of verification to MaineCare or to kind of make that enrollment process easier as opposed to, again, like adding in some added administrative burden, I think that's been named. Is there an agency, entity, org that is looking to do that or no?
I know in other states, there are sometimes the State Doula Coalition will take it upon themselves to be certifying doulas the same way that the Maine Community Health Worker group is sort of an outside group that's certifying CHWs. And I know in other states, doula organizations are providing some of that vetting. Whether or not the state would be interested in accepting that as MaineCare enrollment is something I can't speak to. Julia or Margaret, I don't know if you have anything to add.
I have thoughts. Margaret, do you have thoughts?
You can go first.
Okay. We love it when other folks want to offer services so that state does not have to take on additional administrative work. Obviously, there needs to be structures in place and such. So these collaborative relationships, I think there's definitely opportunity for discussion. So if the Doula Coalition were to manage that, there would have to be, I think somebody said rubrics like in place, right? Like there would have to be clear expectations. I will say, I really appreciate this point. So there's many, many, many other services that go through external parties. So we partner with other organizations, and we pay membership fees and very, very, very high membership fees to have providers or claims or services vetted in kind of the way that we're talking about here. So there is room for opportunity, but I will say with this particular topic, it's kind of on the newer side. So compared to like nursing facility services, doula services aren't as widely applied, right? So big questions that we would have is, if there are folks that are vetting these services, we need to make sure that they're qualified. So we don't want just pencil pushers reviewing these applications. So that would be a bigger discussion down the road that we could have. I think where we can, if a process is needed, finding a way to do that externally absolutely would be in the interest of the department. Don't quote me on that, but if we do need to make that happen, we'd love to talk to this group more about that. But like for the community health workers, for example, where there's been an external training program that the department has accepted essentially as the appropriate pathway. I think we can learn a lot from that process. I know Margaret had been doing more research on that. So I don't want to speak too much there, but anyway, all of that is to say, yes, there's opportunity. However, it has to be structured and needs to pass the straight face test.
It would also need to be funded. I like think that's really
God, that was my big thought. I can't believe I missed that piece. Yes, sorry. These partnerships are usually super expensive and we don't have the money. We'd rather use the funds that we can allocate for the delivery of services, obviously, so that it with thinking of the scope that doula services would be delivered throughout the state, there is a possibility that a partnership with an external agency could cost more than the delivery of services. So food for thought. I don't want to necessarily use our precious time today to dig too much into that, but go ahead, Kate.
Yeah, just I'm thinking of like the Arkansas doulas, like they had state general funding allocated so that they can do a lot of these things. So, and Maine Doula Coalition, for example, and I'm not saying we're even interested in doing this, but like we haven't had that conversation, but there would have to be funding to pay the people at Maine Doula Coalition to do that. And we are a small grant funded organization, just like doing a lot of volunteer labor. So we wouldn't be doing this as volunteers. I tend to agree that doulas reviewing this eligibility makes a lot more sense than people in MaineCare. And where that funding comes from is the big decision, because we can't be asking people to do this kind of administrative work for free. I mean, ideally, our state does do these things for us, right? Like that's why we pay taxes. So yeah, I guess like this is a bigger conversation, but there are models in other states that we can talk about as we move deeper into this. But that then gets us into potentially a legislative process where we have to lobby for the state legislature to allocate funding from our budget, and that is a whole can of worms. And so I don't know anybody who's interested in that at this moment.
Right. So obviously lots to talk about for further meetings as we get further into this process. But coming back to the core competencies, are we ready to put a poll up and sort of have a look? And the thing that I want everybody to keep in mind as we are doing this poll is the question to keep in mind is, what do we want all doulas to know at a minimum? So obviously we want doulas to know about all of the things on this list. But the thing to really think about is what do we want the minimum core competencies to be? Great.
So I don't know how many of you have used Menti before, but you can either log in through your laptop at menti.com and use that code at the top of the screen, or you can use your cell phone and use that QR code on the right.
Thank you for sharing, Julia. As I'm not a subject matter expert in this area, I'm going to recuse myself. So if you're waiting for everybody to respond, count me out.
Me too.
And Sarah, are you okay if I go on once we have the 9 that have voted?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Does Menti, can you remind me, does Menti save those results?
They
Great.
do, yeah. And I
Thank
can
you.
send those over. Yep.
Yeah, and Rebecca, just in terms of how we're going to measure the knowledge, I think that's a great question, and it's one that we're going to talk about as we get into the training requirements.
That's the end. I can stop sharing. I'll pass it back to you, Sarah.
Great. Thank you, everybody. That went exactly as I hoped it would in terms of being a really efficient way to go through all of that. So, Julia, is there a way for us to look quickly at what might be places, the points where we've got consensus and places where we might need to have discussion?
I think so. Let me just take a look here.
Yeah, sure. The couple that I saw, if we want to, I saw, lactation and infant feeding being an area that we might want to have some discussion on. Knowledge of substance use disorders being an area that we might want to have discussion on. And again, these are certainly not areas that doulas shouldn't know about. Again, we're just asking about what that minimum should be. So let's go through quickly. So it looks like we have consensus that we would like to make a recommendation that there's a core competency on anatomy and physiology of pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. It looks like we have, strong majority for labor support skills, being able to provide education to clients, trauma-informed care. It looks like we'd like to make a recommendation that be a core competency. So lactation and infant feeding is an area for discussion. Julia, can you scroll down a little bit again? And then let's kind of keep scrolling. I just want to see the couple that are really where we've really got grief, loss, and termination. And then substance use disorder. Okay. So it looks to me like we have majority on a lot of these for areas where we'd like to make a recommendation. The four that I see that need some discussion are lactation, infant feeding, grief loss, and termination, substance use disorder, and sort of other like business and professional skills are four core competencies that we might want to have some discussion on. Are we comfortable saying that we'd like to make a recommendation on the other core competencies, even if we didn't have, a full 100%, yes vote for all of those, but there were enough that I feel like there would be a majority. Is anyone who came out, I'm not sure, or with a no for any of those that are not in lactation, grief loss, termination, substance use disorder, or business skills? Is there anybody who wants to talk about any of the core competencies that had a sort of a vast majority of people who'd like to make a recommendation on them? Do people have points they want to make on any of those? No. Okay. And again, none of this is final. This is all, a work in progress, but we'll say that we're gonna make a recommendation for core competencies on those ones that had, a vast majority of 8 or more people. And then we can have some discussion on those 4 where there was looked like there was room for more discussion on all of those. Kate, there's some shenanigans going on outside my house right now, so I'm gonna jump away from the meeting for a second. You want to take control of, kind of having the conversation?
Sure. Yeah, I was just, before we get into those 4 that we've identified, I was just wondering if, Rebecca, the conversation you're kind of having in the chat, I'm wondering if you can expand on that a little bit. Like, you had written, I'm having a hard time separating my bias of living in a rural community where the scope of what is needed is likely more broadened due to the limited number of accessible doulas. Can you just say a bit more about what your thinking is around that? Because I think it's an important point.
So I think that where we live, I mean, it's at least an hour to a birthing center. So it's very likely that the communities that we serve in rural areas are going to have to be, as a doula who wants to be known as responsible or thought of as responsible, I feel like it's my duty to have a broadened, like the broadened knowledge to be able to serve in all capacities of every outcome. So it's really hard for me to say, no, I don't think that's important for me to do my job. So like there are so many of them that I'm like, yeah, I feel like I couldn't serve to my best ability if I don't have that knowledge. Whereas people in more urban areas, they can choose, like, yes, I just want to serve these populations, not these populations, but these outcomes, you know, and these parts of doula work. So for me, it's really hard to say, no, I don't think that's important, because to me, the way that I plan on serving, it is very important that I have that broadened knowledge. And I would encourage everyone in rural areas, you know. But again, it all goes back to taking on clients and knowing what you can offer.
Yeah.
But then you look at the other way where you want to allow doulas to not have to check off all of those boxes, but say if people don't know about lactation or loss of pregnancy and that kind of stuff, as long as when you go to apply for these things, you can say, I don't plan on serving in these areas, but I know where I can send people, like having that knowledge of referrals, you know? So
Yeah.
that's a different perspective to look at it, saying like you have to have all of these things, but if I don't have this skill, at least I know where I can send people to.
Yeah, I think that's a really important perspective, and I wonder if any of the other folks who are working in rural Maine want to add to that at all. Because I know we have a couple other folks who I'm looking at you, Leanne, but others too.
Yeah, I was feeling really similar to what you were saying, Becky, about that the need to have like an awareness of all the options and all the like. I find that as one of my like responsibilities almost, is like being hyper aware of where to refer people to, because it will be a long drive for them most of the time. And that doesn't necessarily mean I have to provide those services, but yeah, definitely being aware of where to refer people to and when that is outside of the scope. And that's part of that other talking point, or you know, the other piece of that is when is that referral part made. So yeah.
Yeah, I think this piece you're hitting on, both of you, about, okay, what do we feel that people need to be able to know to responsibly serve their communities, and if they are not able, not trained in lactation, the minimum is that they can refer to people in the region who are sufficiently trained and capable, right? And so definitely there's this heavy concentration of doulas serving southern Maine, right, where we have the highest populations, and everywhere else it's very limited. So I hear what you're saying, Becky, of like, when people have really few options for who they can see as a doula, if you're not competent in certain things, then it's like, I mean, I think around grief and loss, I want to specifically just like speak to that. We never know when a birth is going to become a death. So if we're working in birth, I think it's like very important to know how to deal with loss and death. And I'm like, we cannot know that that's not going to happen just because we think we're supporting a birth. And so, yeah, I think that's why I feel strongly about everyone getting trained in how to hold loss, because you may be like, well, I don't want to deal with that outcome. Well, you may not have a choice. You may be the person someone has trusted to be there, and now they are losing their child, or someone is losing their partner, their mother, whoever. And that doesn't mean you can't call in extra reinforcements, but I don't think we can go into birth situations thinking we're never going to have to deal with loss or termination. Like, we may not feel comfortable around abortion, but there are so many reasons people have abortions. And even if they're not working with us for abortion support, that doesn't mean they haven't had abortions in their past. When 1 in 4 women in this country will have at least one abortion by the age of 45, we're always working with abortion patients, whether we know that or not. So those are just things to think about when we're dealing with, like, it does feel like there's a certain responsibility to be able to hold the full scope of people's reproductive lives, or be able to refer out. But it's a hard moment to refer out, when someone just lost their baby, and to be like, okay, I'm not the one. I know we've built all this trust, but I'm going to hand you to someone else. I mean, that's kind of tough. It doesn't mean we couldn't call in reinforcements, right? But to hand someone off at that moment and be like, I'm out, that's tough.
I guess I just want to make sure. I mean, I agree with you completely, Kate. And as somebody, I think those of us, I know there are some of us on here who are very rural and are maybe the only doula in our area. And if somebody didn't get that training through their training program, I just want to make sure that especially in rural areas and for communities that only have one or two doulas available, that we're not making a list of core competencies that's going to be a barrier, I don't want to lose people. And that's my concern. If there's one doula and for a population, and the doula training program that doula did doesn't have loss in the curriculum, and that doula has to then go and get additional training in order to enroll in MaineCare, that's a barrier, and it's not great for that doula, and it's not great for that entire community. And that's why, I keep coming back to that question of like, what's the minimum that we want doulas to be able to show to enroll. Tiffany?
You just said it at the end. I just like gentle reminder that we're talking about establishing minimum requirements, which does not mean that you can't expand your scope or expand your training, especially in a way that specifically meets the needs of the people that you're serving. So I don't know, that's like good to kind of reorient that we're talking about some of the minimums, but it doesn't reflect the maximum training that you can access.
Kate?
Yeah, I think this reminds me of something we talked about in the last meeting, which is like there are pieces of education that are not a part of like most doula trainings that we may feel like, okay, there's a need to create these. And that is work that is outside the scope of the council. Like, I think there's definitely some thinking going on with, at Maine Doula Coalition about like, what do even people who are currently serving as doulas need to maybe learn in order to serve MaineCare populations? Because a lot of people don't serve MaineCare populations right now. And I guess I just like would flag that like where we are seeing the most mortality and morbidity is in MaineCare populations. It's in low-income communities. And that's where I think like we're not talking about a minimum for all doulas. We're talking about a minimum for doulas who want to be reimbursed by the state. And I think that when we're talking about this as the reason this TEMA program exists is because we're trying to reduce these disparities that exist in our communities. We're trying to improve outcomes. And so I do think I both want people to be able to become Medicaid covered doulas. And I'm also like, are they going to be competent to serve Medicaid populations? And in that case, I do think you need to know about substance use disorder. I do think you need to know about grief and loss. And so I also have that concern, like hearing what's being said about rural doulas. I think this is, again, a place where it's like an outside organization outside of MaineCare needs to think about how are we going to build up those offerings so that everybody has an opportunity to get educated in this in a low barrier way. But it does make me nervous, the idea of someone not having any of this training and then going in to serve the populations who are where we're most likely to see these sort of problems concentrated.
Leanne, I don't want to put you on the spot, and I might have missed if you already commented on this while I was outside dealing with some things. Do you have thoughts about this as somebody who's in Washington County?
Yeah, I think exactly what Kate was saying is where my thought process is, and in terms of like knowing there's only a few doulas, and hopefully, the plan is to grow the workforce, and then knowing it is a specific population that we are applying to serve, that does require to have a skill set and a knowledge about people that we probably, like currently for me, I can speak to my experience, like I don't serve, right? I very rarely have a client that uses MaineCare. That's just, those two things are separate at this point. People that have the money to pay for a doula out of pocket is separate from, generally speaking, from people who utilize MaineCare. And so knowing that the population that I am going to be serving and applying to serve as part of my plan is different than what I currently serve, like I think that requires a different amount of knowledge and skill set. And I think that is important to acknowledge too, like that the people that we want to serve to help improve outcomes, like there's more to learn, I think, than what I currently do, in my experience so far.
Other thoughts? I know I missed a few minutes, so it looks like the conversation has been primarily around the grief, loss, and termination core competency. Kate, I don't.
Yeah, no. I just had asked Becky to expand on what she had put in the chat, and that led us to just this talking about what both Becky and Leanne have like identified as this tension of, in places where there are very few doulas, you really want those doulas to be super well resourced and trained and able to make really competent referrals. And also that tension of, we don't want to disqualify the very few people in rural areas who are doulas, right? So I think that's just, we haven't moved into talking about particular competencies. We were just kind of like figuring out this piece, particularly around rural areas where there are few doulas. So I think it's just a tension that's been pulled out and named that's helpful for us to like think about as we head into the conversations about these 4 core competencies.
Okay, great. I think my inclination is we have these 4 core competencies that we want to have some more discussion and thought around, and we have 15 minutes left of the meeting. And so I think my inclination would be to sort of pick these up next month and potentially just do another poll with just the 4 of these to see if people's thoughts have changed as we take some time away to think and do more reading and have more thinking about it. And then pick up discussion on that from there, because we did a great chunk of work today getting that we have a whole bunch of core competencies that it looks like we're going to recommend. Does that sound like a good path forward for people? Yeah. Okay, great.
I guess, can I just maybe make a suggestion? I mean, I think that when you do the Mentimeter or come up with it, that maybe an ability to, I mean, I know you want to do it quickly, but to say, I'm not sure about this because, or I'm worried, you're just a brief, or maybe have the questions be a little bit more, a little less general and a little bit more specific, so that it may be able to tease out where people's concerns lie.
Yeah,
like, are they worried about this being something that could be exclusionary, or are they worried about or are they thinking that it's, anyway, but something that just teases out a little bit more information.
Okay, yeah, we can try and make that happen for when we come back. So we skipped over this piece in the agenda that's around council recommendations on liability insurance and also continuing education. And I did that because I really wanted to get this core competency piece like rolling a little bit. And I was worried if we did that, that we might not have time to get some traction on the core competency piece. And so I think we'll probably, I mean, we could have a quick discussion about those now if there's, if we can get some consensus on either one of those. The other thing that I wanted to touch on at this meeting is that I think we're all seeing, and Kate and I have noticed, there's this, we're hitting the point where the conversation around core competencies and the conversation around the education pathways are all kinds of wrapped up into each other, right? Like, we have these core competencies. How are people going to prove them or to show competency in that? And so we have slides, existing slides that we'll make sure that everybody actually has access to, that has a breakdown of what other states have done But the primary pathways that other states are using that have these sort of dual pathways or three pathways. So there's sort of a certificate or a coursework pathway where people have done a doula training and have some kind of a certificate of completion for that, or they have done coursework from a couple of different organizations and combined those things would meet, the curriculums for those would meet the core competencies. There is a lot of states have this experience pathway where they are sending in an attestation form or some letters of recommendation, and also generally having to prove that they have attended a certain number of births or worked with a certain number of clients. And the states are typically calling that an experience pathway. And then some states have a legacy pathway where new doulas coming in have to kind of meet these standards around training or experience or whatever it is. But there is a certain period of time where existing doulas are able to be to apply for Medicaid eligibility, provider eligibility, because they have been working for a certain period of time and have a lot of generated experience. And there's one more, which is, I haven't seen a lot. I think there's only one or two states where I saw this, where there is a mentorship pathway. So instead of completing a doula training from a doula training organization, a mentor or somebody that you studied with as a doula kind of is able to tick all those core competency boxes for you and sign off. And this is the way I was trained. I think there are, traditional birth workers, cultural birth workers who may potentially have been trained through this mentorship pathway. And so that would be a way to include those folks. So just all things to think about ahead of our next meeting. And again, we'll make sure that you all get the slides to look at what states are doing in terms of those different pathways. But the pathways are certainly the way that the core competencies get are attested to or proven as potential doulas are enrolling into MaineCare. Questions about that? Okay. With our remaining 10 minutes, does anybody have thoughts about a recommendation around liability insurance? And I know we're right at the end, but if this is low-hanging fruit where there seems to be a lot of consensus in the group. So there are 7 states, or 28% of the states that have that are currently reimbursing. So it's 28% require liability insurance. Kate and I did a little bit of digging around, and looks like in Maine, the annual cost of liability insurance ranges from $200 to $500 a year for a doula. So not a ton of states requiring this, and there is a little bit of a cost barrier. Do people have thoughts on this?
Do you mind explaining the liability insurance a little more? This even is something I've seen in my experience, but I'm not really even sure the purpose or the scenario in which this would be necessary or needed in general, but specifically through the MaineCare, minimum piece.
Yeah, I mean, I carry malpractice insurance as an acupuncturist. Kate, do you want to speak to this? Because I know that you have this as a doula, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's widely recommended if someone's running their own doula business that they have liability insurance, because you're a business, right? And stuff can happen. And so I'm happy to send out to the group the sort of document that lays out what my policy is that I use as an example. I think, it's interesting. Most states don't require this. And I think it does present a cost barrier. It's also a level of protection I would really recommend for anyone who can afford it. So yeah, but I mean, I'm happy. It covers certain incidents where someone is injured or harmed in some way, or comes at you for some wrongdoing. it's kind of like the basic insurance, kind of like with car liability insurance, right? It's not going to cover me for like, it's not the same as collision insurance, right? Which is like pricey and I don't have that. If I get in a collision, I'm kind of screwed. But I have the baseline, right? Like, so if I, bump somebody's car, it can be covered, right? So it's kind of like that. And I'm happy to send out again, like the policy document so folks can kind of see an example. And I can send the website. I think the most common insurer for doulas is a company called Alternative Balance. And so I can send that link out as well so people can just take a look. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I see it as in thinking about my own malpractice insurance, it's a protection for me so that if somebody decides that they don't like something that they've done or they're harmed by something that they've done, and that provides some protection so that I'm not being come after personally. The question is whether we want to require doulas to carry that versus have it be a personal choice.
It seems to me that it should be a personal choice. I mean, I can't imagine practicing without malpractice insurance, but I was, as a physician, I don't know what the issues and challenges are that you're facing as a doula, and what sort of things you can be held liable for. But I do think it's probably I think it's a personal choice as opposed to a medical practice or a hospital where you have to have it. I think, but I think it should probably be a personal choice.
Anybody
I
have?
think,
Go ahead, Nunu. Sorry.
yeah,
No,
I
go.
think it should be mentioned, but just because of like what you explained make a lot of sense to me. I wouldn't have known that. We should have that place of mentioning and explaining about it, and then we leave it for a person to choose whether they want to carry it. But I would really encourage the mentioning of it in part of our trainings.
Anybody have strong feelings about requiring liability insurance? Oh, Tiffany, sorry, I didn't see your hand up.
Do you know why many third-party payers require a certain level of malpractice or liability insurance? If I knew that, I think I'd be able to better like contribute to like yay or nay.
Why the states are requiring it?
For it seems I'm not a MaineCare provider, so I can't speak to MaineCare itself. But for example, like Anthem or Cigna, like in order to be a provider with them, I have to carry a certain level of malpractice insurance to even like have my application considered. And just kind of curious as to why.
Probably
Why
to
is it?
protect them, right?
Yeah, I mean, I know. I mean, as an acupuncturist, it's required by the licensing board, by the state licensing board, and like CPMs are not required to carry it. I know it's like a licensing decision, but
Well, maybe the IBCLC would be a good example because that's not something that's licensed in the state of Maine. But if I want to be a in-network provider with Anthem or with Cigna, with Aetna as an IBCLC, I am required by the insurance company to carry malpractice insurance.
yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm just kind of curious, like what is the purpose? Because then maybe I could better understand what is to be gained or not gained here in the context of doulas and MaineCare. I don't really have a desire to at this moment to make it required because I can see that it would be cost prohibitive and would exclude a lot of doulas. Um, and I just don't understand like why it often is required to begin with.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, Tiffany. It's a really good question. And certainly as insurance companies are in covering doula care, it probably will be something that's required for doulas by insurance companies. But yeah, I mean, in terms of like state by state Medicaid doula requirements, it's not something that, it's not something that all states are requiring for state benefit plans. Yeah. Do we feel comfortable providing, or maybe providing a recommendation that we are not going to require liability insurance, or do we have more questions? Becky?
I mean, I'm comfortable saying that it's up to each provider. However, maybe we could just have some literature about the importance of it or risks and stuff like that, just so
Sure.
that people are knowledgeable.
Yeah, I think what Nuna was saying, like if our recommendation can be that on whatever site that MaineCare is going to talk about eligibility for doulas, that they provide links to information on liability insurance and that it's like recommended but not required. Like I think we can make a recommendation that they share that info.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. Does MaineCare have a requirement for other, so they required for acupuncture and MaineCare requires it for lactation? Others?
MaineCare doesn't cover acupuncture. I am required to have it by the state licensing board.
So does MaineCare require it of any services that they reimburse?
Do they require it for IBCLC?
I don't know yet because IBCLCs are on the same journey that the doulas are, where the state has provided a way for us to become MaineCare providers, and the rate determinations, recommendations just need to be made. So I don't know. I'm not a MaineCare provider. I just happen to be with other insurers, and
I'm glad you mentioned that because I'm about to start that class so that I
So
can
can
we have Julie here. Julie,
yeah,
maybe
right. That's what I'm saying. Can we ask them?
Many other providers are required to carry liability insurance. So that's something that we are happy to follow up on, is to see if that is an expectation across the board. Part of the question as well is oftentimes this insurance is connected to licenses, and where we are not going through DLC, where we're not looking at licenses in this particular area. That's a question that we have as well. So we're going to check on our back end, but that is a standard across, to my knowledge, most other provider types.
Thanks, Julie.
Yeah.
Great. So I think we're about at time. I appreciate all of you and your work on all of this today and hanging in through this process and asking really amazing questions. And I always come away from these meetings with a lot to think about. So we will try and collect information about all of the questions that you have and come back next month to kind of talk about core competencies some more and hopefully dive into some of the training module or models. Yeah. Great to see all of you and hope you have a really good Thursday.
Bye, everybody. Thanks
Thank
so
you all.
much.
Take care.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Sarah and Julia, do you want to hang on?
Sure, can hang on.
Certainly can, yeah.
Oh man, that took a lot out of me for some reason.
Is everything okay at your house? What was the ruckus?
We realized this morning that we were almost completely out of propane because my 14-year-old has been running the heat in his room at 80 degrees, like nonstop and forgetting to turn it off. So we usually fill up like in March and then we're usually good till September. And I came down this morning and the house smelled weird. And I was like, okay, so we had an emergency drop off. Anyway, they were out there and I heard a big ruckus because I was worried that maybe the tank was too low to fill or something like that. So I had to, but everything's fine.
Good.
I just have a teenager who thinks he lives in the tropics and he does not.
My nephew,
Anyway.
he does the same thing. He uses the heat pump and it's like 90 in his room. I'm like, what are you doing?
Yeah. He's like laying on top of his bed in like his underwear. He's like, I'm cold. And I'm like, put on socks. Like,
Put some clothes on, you'll be okay.
Anyway, Kate, did you have?
Oh no, I just thought it made sense to check in and see, identify the follow-up items and just like see how folks thought that went.
Yeah, I thought it went well. I think I'm feeling the time pressure a little bit, and I am feeling this group is so thoughtful and has such incredible perspectives, and I feel like the big bad guy trying to get everybody back on track all the time. So,
Yeah.
But
yeah, definitely it's like how to strike that balance of like letting the process unfold and knowing we have to have a certain amount of things done by a certain time. But I think the good news is like, the core competencies, I think only having 4 of them to like dive into, I think is great.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I have that Julie and Margaret were going to take back some of the feasibility around references for background checks and potentially maybe find out about an attestation form. And I have that they were going to take back checking on the liability insurance piece and MaineCare requirements.
Yeah.
And I have that we were going to get some more literature on the reasons why we might want to require liability insurance.
Yeah, I was thinking I can just like provide, yeah, I can look that up and send that to you all to look at. But yeah, just a little more concrete information for people. It sounds like it sounds like people don't want to recommend that it's required. I mean, that's what I was getting, but that it would be helpful to identify like what's the information we would recommend that MaineCare share with people about it.
Yeah.
Um,
Julia, did you have anything else that was takeaway that we need to collect for the next meeting that I might have missed?
Just about the postpartum versus birth doula, and if they're able to have different sets of core competencies. I think that was more of a policy question, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
also,
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, we wanted them to look into a third party, looking at the or being able to verify their core competencies and letters of recommendation.
Yeah. I mean, that would be Maine Doula Coalition.
Right. And I was chatting with Julie, and I don't think TEMA would have that type of funding, but we can certainly investigate and see. But
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I wish we had the capability to do that, and we just don't.
Right. No, of course not. Not without funding. It's not feasible.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like maybe in a scenario where there were TEMA funding for a couple years of that, there would still need to be the fight at the legislature to get money for that. Again, knowing that this is not a huge number, right? This is not an enormous workload, but yeah, so I mean, that's that. I think I'm of like I'm of 2 minds. One, that like I think doulas reviewing other doulas eligibility and materials makes a lot of sense. That's what other professions do, right? Like licensing boards are made up of people from those professions. And Maine is such a small place. I actually think it could be not good for the doula community to have certain doulas very visibly like, identified as the people who becomes a Medicaid provider. Like, I actually think that could be a real problem. And in a bigger state, it probably wouldn't be. But here, I just think it could feel personal. And I just actually think having the state do it simplifies a lot of things. And I loved Juliana's idea of like, a character attestation form, like if that's possible to systematize that piece instead of letters. But I think even for the education and mentorship pathway, we're considering letters, right, of recommendation. And so it's like, does everything get systematized? It's just, and then I keep thinking of Loretta saying like, this is we have to figure that out. You guys don't figure that out. And so I'm like, I just feel like we're getting different messages and like it feels a little unclear to me where we ought to land with the information we've been given so far. Like Maggie seemed wanting us to like really consider what the administrative role would be and the burden. And then what I heard from Loretta is like, don't. And those are two opposite things. And so I feel a little confused about how we guide the process with that conflicting information.
Yeah, I can certainly take that back too and figure out the final say on that. I think just from the conversations we've had before, we don't want to talk about something that is completely out of the scope of what MaineCare is going to do. But again, if it's something we can't decide, then, you know, maybe it shouldn't be talked about anyways. So I'll take that back and we can get a final say on what that's going to look like and how you can guide that conversation.
Yeah, and I definitely heard Julie, like, we really like check boxes. Like, this is, so, you know, like, I think as much as we're being told not to think about it, I would much rather think about it and have our recommendations be accepted versus like not think about it and have to end up having to have a lot more sort of discussion or, yeah.
I don't want our recommendations to get kind of lost in the shuffle because we didn't consider that. And also it's like hard to contain the conversations on the council level when we start getting into this like wondering, like we have a bunch of hypotheticals and we just have no answers about like, I mean, presumably MaineCare knew they would have to administer this program like when they create the benefit, like there has to be some administrative burden, right? And again, this is why it's like pretty clear why so many states just have very simple attestation forms and people check boxes because they clearly don't want to have a ton of administrative human power involved in that. And so, but on the other end for, you know, for quality control, it's tough, right? Like if you're not reading letters and you're just checking an attestation form, there is like less knowledge about how qualified people are. Yeah.
And do you know how other states are doing it? Are they doing it like digitally or are they doing it paper and mailing?
I've looked at a lot of the state applications and it seems to be like there's options for both.
Okay.
To submit online or to submit a paper application. I think, Julia, the thing that I'm wondering is like and I think Kate and I have talked about this a little bit, is there's gonna be like a big influx of doulas applying in the first couple years. And having sat on the CPM board, like, and watched this process, there's a bigger workload in the first couple years, and then it will be a trickle. You know, there's probably be a few doulas applying after that every few years. And I'm wondering if there is money in TEMA to like support. I don't know. Kate and I had kind of talked about there being potentially TEMA money to support that like big influx of doulas and potentially like bringing doulas or, you know, some other people in as consultants to like kind of review that initial like big batch of applications that's going to come in, and then it would taper off and potentially that it would be manageable for the state because it's not going to be a huge number of people applying. With 12,000 births a year, the workforce is going to get saturated, you know, like so that's something else that I was wondering about, if there's TEMA money to support review of a whole lot of applications, or for that legacy pathway, if the state comes back that it's, you know, it's too much of an administrative burden to deal with all of that.
Right. Yeah, I'll put that on my radar to figure that out. I think that makes sense. And like you said, I think it would be much more feasible than paying a third party. I know it would be Maine Doula Coalition, but even still, a consultant would be a different, you know, game than an organization. So I think that's a great idea. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds
And
good.
because I don't, yeah, I mean, it would be Maine Doula Coalition, and I don't know that we want to be those people
Right.
in the doula
Mhm.
community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, part
That's
of
a
me
bummer for
does.
me. You know what I mean?
Like, part of me wants
I don't want
to.
to be the doula police. I don't want to be the doula cop.
Right.
Yeah, but that's it. It's like I'm so curious about it. And also I just think it's bad for relationships in amongst our workforce. If we have too much power concentrated in one place, it makes it harder for us to do this other work that we do. And so and I think that if Medicaid is the program people are applying to be eligible for, it makes sense for Medicaid to run it, right? But yeah, the idea of like contracting with folks in those first couple of years, I mean, it would be a small number after that. Like, it's not even a huge number. It's not even a huge number to start. You know, if you have like 100, 150, maybe tops, like applications in those first 2 years, I mean, that's a lot.
That would be a
It's
lot.
probably not going to be that many.
Yeah.
How many doulas
and-
in Maine now? I should know this, but
What's
How
that?
many doulas are there?
Yeah.
We don't know.
Okay.
I mean, but we would guess when we did
80?
our workforce assessment that there were between 60 and 80, maybe statewide. And now there have been 30 Wabanaki doulas who were trained, and not all of them are likely to practice, right? So we're looking at maybe 100 statewide tops.
Okay.
And some people are only going to do 1 or 2 births a year for friends, right? Like they're not going to become Medicaid doulas. Some people are never going to be Medicaid doulas, even though they're in the business. Some people, you know, so I just think like realistically, the administrative burden, I just think it's important to keep stressing to people like how small the workforce actually is. And that also, it's very likely in the beginning year or two that a lot of the folks who are going to apply to be MaineCare doulas are going to have the requirements, the stuff required to just like easily be like, okay, I don't know. I just think it's going to be, especially if we do a legacy pathway, it's going to be like pretty expedited the first year or two. Yeah. So anyway, that is, you know, this is just like stuff that I don't think I think it's just for us a question of like, how much do we bring this into the council meetings and how much do we not, right? And the conversation that started while you were away, Sarah, was just like Rebecca and Leanne, you know, talking about this like tension in rural Maine, which is really important. I just wanted to give them space to like chat about it. And I think, again, it's like something that isn't resolved, right? But it's something we can head into the conversation about competencies with. Something I'm wondering for when we talk about the pathways for like education and training, I'm wondering if it would help to kind of draft a couple scenarios that are like based in real situations to illustrate what we mean for people.
Yeah, I had the exact same thought, Kate, that we need to make a couple of slides with that really clearly outline what each of those things are, and exactly that, to make some little like case studies of like doula A did this and doula B did that, so that people really understand what that is. Yeah, so we can make a start on that.
Yeah. I just think given how much they think in detail, I think scenarios will help make it concrete for people.
We can make some really pretty slides.
Yeah, exactly. Sarah's favorite. But yeah, I think that went well. Like only having 4 competencies to talk about feels good. And I think where we're going to end up likely is that people don't want to require a bunch of things, but it does again feed us as at Maine Doula Coalition around like what sort of modules do we want to be able to maybe offer in the first few years here for people to get like up to speed on some of these things that are maybe not required but strongly recommended. We know they'll be useful.
Yep. Other thoughts, Julia?
No, I think it went great. Yeah. No thoughts. I think I'll bring this back to Maggie. She'll be back next week. And we can get moving on just having a more concrete answers to some of these questions.
Yeah. How are you feeling?
Good. I was just telling my husband last night, I feel so pregnant and I have like 16 weeks to go. So I'm like a little nervous for the third trimester, but it's going well.
There's this thing that happens like around 25 weeks
Mm-hmm.
where you're like, I cannot possibly become any more pregnant. This must end. Like this cannot go
I'm glad
on.
I'm not the only one because I was like, what is happening? Like I was
No.
waking up from the basement last night and I was like, I can't move well. I'm not moving.
I don't know like I don't know like the biochemical mechanism, but like 24 to 27 weeks, people seem to hit this point where they're like, this can't go on. And then you like get over that sort of like hump and then you're fine. It happened to me. I've watched it with hundreds of clients and it happened to me also that it was so.
That's reassuring. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Hopefully
just
a
so
blip.
much discomfort. It's
Yes.
and I would say like if there's one thing I recommend to everybody is like as you get further in pregnancy, if you can take 5 to 10 minutes a day to stretch.
Oh
like
yes,
when
I
you
just got a
wake
yoga
up,
ball actually.
you go to sleep, before you go to sleep, just stretching helps with some of this discomfort. It's not going to take it away, but it just like, especially around your like pelvis, your hips, you know, and your calves and hamstrings. I think because people are so uncomfortable, they're less likely to stretch. And it's actually like, that's the thing that's going to help a little bit. So, and when you're sitting, keeping your hips above your knees. So like putting something under your butt when you sit so that your hips are a little elevated above where your knees are.
Okay. Good to know.
Yeah.
Lean into the absurdity of it all because it just gets more.
I know. Somebody asked me the other day, how are you feeling? And I was like, oh, I feel very pregnant. And they were like, well, good luck because you're, not due till August. I was like, well, thank you. That's really reassuring.
It's not helpful. It's not helpful. No, you're right where you should be. And the discomfort, I always say, is like, it just means that like you're growing your baby well and they're getting closer to coming, right? But like pregnancy, I always talk about it as like it's the original sci-fi. Like it's just bizarre, the changes that happen. And then the relief people feel the second they are no longer pregnant. It's not just because you get to meet your baby, it's also because like, oh my God, my body can start to shift back to the way it's supposed to be.
My body is mine again. Yes. Very much anticipating that.
Yeah, it's a gradual shift, I think, for people feeling like themselves, but oh my gosh, the immediate relief of like, I can eat and breathe more easily. That's very real.
Well, yeah, thanks for asking, but we are very much excited for August to come.
Yeah.
It's so exciting.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for today.
And we have a meeting next week, I think. Let me just check.
We do, and I think I have to miss that one, unfortunately. I have a client I had to meet with then. But Sarah, can you be there?
On my calendar.
Would you prefer to move it, Kate, or is it okay if we meet?
I think it's okay if Sarah's there, if she's okay with it. And I am working on this. I haven't lost track of this, like pulling together some of these conversations we've been having over email into a more trackable sort of document. I am working on that. I'm just also in the middle of a move, so I am happy to do it. I'm working on it, but just flagging, I haven't forgotten it. I will get it to everybody.
Moving, and she only has one good foot.
I'm moving. I have one good foot. I have to recruit so many friends, call in every favor to figure out how to manage the logistics of this move. And like my new apartment, I went in and I was like, the walls in the living room and dining room are hideous. And like they need to be repatched and repainted desperately. So now I'm trying to make that happen. And it's just nightmare.
Yeah, the joys of moving. And then when you only have one foot, that's,
it's so stupid. I was like, moving with one foot is so much harder than I thought it would be.
Yeah, I can't imagine. Yes.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm working on it. I'll get it to y'all, but I don't think it's like the most urgent thing, but I don't want to lose track of all these different threads that
Have
we're
you
pulling.
started anything? If you haven't, I'm feeling better. I have some extra time. I could start something and just send you a link. We could work on it
Yeah,
internally.
so I'm happy to do it if it doesn't feel like it needs to be done like tomorrow.
Okay, there's no urgency on my end. Just saying, if
yeah.
you want help, let me know.
Thanks. Appreciate it. All right. Awesome, y'all. Well, I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Yes, you too. Have a great weekend.
Ditto. All right. Bye.
Bye.